Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. The Breathing by Anonymous. This story happened when I was about 10 or 11 years old. My parents had been divorced, and it was a few years prior, and my mom had just been remarried to my stepfather. My younger sister and I had been living in the house with my mom and my stepdad since the divorce. It was a newer house built in the 80s by my stepdad with his own two hands. It's a beautiful home with cedar siding, and it sits on top of a hill in the upstate New York countryside. You get amazing views of the night sky up there, all year round. And I remember one night, my family and I got home late from the state fair. My sister and I, being young kids, did have a bedtime. I brushed my teeth and headed off to my room, saying goodnight to my parents, who were still up watching TV, and to my sister, who was already in her room. I continued down to my room at the end of the long, dark hallway, just like any other night. My room was set up with my bed in the corner, and there was a 2-foot gap between the wall and my bed. I usually slept on my side, facing the open door to my room, and my back was to the wall again, just like any other night. I had barely closed my eyes when I sensed that something was different in my room. My senses were all in high gear all of a sudden. My heart was racing. I felt my neck stiffen up, and the hairs on my arms were like cactus needles. My eyes shot open. I didn't see anything or hear anything for a few seconds. And then, behind me, breathing. Heavy, strained breathing, like a sick person trying to catch their breath. I was frozen with fear as it got louder and louder. I couldn't look back. I couldn't move. I just stared at the open door to my room, getting ready to flee for my life. Eventually, I could feel the breaths on my neck. At that point, I shot out the door down the hall, cowering in a corner next to a bookcase until my mom finally walked by and found me there sobbing. I was hysterical with fear, and I couldn't get the words out to tell her what had just happened. She tried to get me to go back down to my room to calm me down, but I obviously shot that idea down quickly. I remember my stepdad walking down to my room and looking around and finding nothing out of the ordinary. My mom and I went to her room, and I finally got a grip of things. I was finally able to tell her what I had just experienced. And as I told it to her, I saw her face turn wide and a look of fearful concern wash over her. She hugged me and abruptly told me that we would talk more tomorrow and that there was nothing to worry about. Eventually, I agreed to go back to my room for the night, albeit with the lights on. The next day, my mom and I started talking again, and I could see why she didn't want to tell me her story that night. When my mom was about my age, she'd been playing the piano at my grandparents' house after school, and she was the only one home at the time. As she sat at the piano playing an old piece of music, she heard breaths directly behind her, and she tried to ignore it by playing louder and drowning it out. But just like with my room, the breathing got louder and louder. My mom screamed and ran out of the house and wouldn't go back until my grandparents got home. And when I think about this day, it's so baffling. I'm very skeptical, and I won't say I believe in ghosts, but I heard what I heard, and I felt the breaths on my neck. I saw with my own two eyes that there was nothing in my room, and what are the chances that the same crazy experience happened to both me and my mom at roughly the same age? My mom has an interesting theory. In 1927, my great-grandfather died of pneumonia at the age of 30. My mom speculated that this might be his way of keeping an eye on the family. And if it's not him, I shudder to think what it actually is. I never looked behind me that night, so I'll never know for sure. But I will say this: the experience has changed me. I now sleep with earplugs in. I have a fan running and even a pillow over my head at times. If the breathing ever comes back to visit me, I'd rather not hear it again. The Dream by Anonymous. In 1989, my infant son and I moved into a 2-bedroom, multi-level duplex just south of Milwaukee, Oregon. I'm not psychic, but I had seen something move off a table in the home we had just moved out of. No other weird occurrences happened there, but other residents of the home had told me stories about apparitions and things moving. One night in our new place, I'd come home from college, hung my keys up on the wall, and put my son down for a nap. When I walked back into the kitchen 2 hours later, the keys were swinging violently back and forth. I looked at it for a little while, thinking I had bumped them after hanging them up, although I realized they shouldn't have still been swinging like that. Recently, my son and I have been relating different stories about weird and scary dreams that we both had while living there. We heard voices in his pillow and saw a shadow man in his room. And in May of '97, I woke up from a very intense, vivid dream. My neighbor's/friend's house had caught fire, and I was standing outside in the parking lot looking through her house's wall and ceiling at the roof beams, which had those little charm marks that looked like bikes all over them. A police officer came up to me and said, "We found Carrie's children, but we don't know where she is. Do you know where she is?" The dream scared me so badly that I called my friend from work that morning to beg her to stop smoking in her house. I told her what the cop had said in my dreams, and that kind of shocked her. Needless to say, she quit smoking altogether soon after I spoke with her. About 6 weeks later, in mid-June, the Thursday before Father's Day, I left work early because I was having mild breathing problems. I was standing on the front porch talking with the apartment building's owner and manager, but my neighbor Carrie walked over to take some used baby clothes to my next-door neighbor. Is that the woman who had just had her second child after leaving her abusive husband? I thought. Carrie knocked on the door several times and then suddenly cried out, "Gina!" and then burst into the apartment. When she came running back out, breathless, she yelled to the owner and manager to call the fire department. Apparently, all of the gas burners on the stove were turned on just far enough to emit gas, but not far enough to engage the lighting device. Also, the pilot light on the water heater had been extinguished but was still emitting fumes. There was graffiti on the wall saying something to the effect of, "Where are my fucking kids?" My next-door neighbor had gone overnight to a friend's house to do laundry, and her ex-husband had come by and pounded on the door around 1 a.m. When she didn't answer, he busted in, started a fire on the second floor, and turned on the gas. The fire had gone out before it reached the fumes. I assumed that the reason for my breathing problems was because of the gas fumes from next door. So the fire department said that if Carrie had gone over there and discovered the situation when she did, the apartment would have exploded in another hour or two, taking God knows how many of us with it. She herself told me that if she hadn't quit smoking when I told her about the dream I had, she probably would have had a lit cigarette in her hand when she knocked on that door. And now the story gets crazy. That night, my son slept in my bed with me because he was afraid that the ex-husband would come back to finish what he started. Around 1 a.m., there was a loud knock on the door, and I scrambled out of bed and ran into the living room yelling, "Who is it?" The response was, "Battalion 6, ma'am. The apartment next door is on fire. You need to get out now." For some weird reason, I took the time to put on some sweatpants and grab a blanket as I got my son up the stairs and toward the door. The ex-husband had indeed returned to finish what he had started. While we were standing across the street, a cop came up to me asking if I could tell if everyone was out of the building. I counted heads and said yes. Then he asked me if I had seen my next-door neighbor Carrie, saying that they knew where her children were, but they couldn't find her. Did I know where she was? When we were finally allowed back in the apartment to get some more clothing, I noticed the firemen had busted a hole in the wall right at the top of the stairs. Through it, I could see the roof beams. And thank God no one was hurt, and the only damage we had to our possessions was an old couch that had gotten wet from the fire hoses. I was planning on throwing that out anyway. We had renter's insurance to cover our motel costs until we could find a new apartment. But every time I drive by the old neighborhood, I say thank you in the general direction of our old home. And I wonder just what crazy parapsychics enabled whoever or whatever to give me that dream I chose to act on, saving so many lives. The Jinns by Anonymous. The story begins in the Middle East. My family is from Afghanistan, but when I was born we crossed the border to Pakistan due to the Taliban terrorism. Before me, there was another child, a boy who sadly died shortly after being conceived. This tragic event plays an important role in the upcoming paranormal that was about to burden us. Living in Pakistan, it was just my mother and I in a small apartment. My father was in another city where he would work and send us money. Middle Easterners and Muslims believe in jinn. They're what Westerners would call ghosts, however, we refer to them as lower ranks of angels, almost cursed, able to take different formations and possess. It may get a little confusing because there are many forms of jinn, as you'll see throughout the story. Our first encounter with the jinn was in our apartment in Pakistan. It was past midnight because the city was quiet and Mom, who was sleeping right beside me on the floor, was fast asleep. We didn't have much money. Our apartment was small and empty with only 2 rooms. We only had one window in the apartment, which opened to a massive oak tree outside. As I was asleep, I'd hear swift movements outside and sniggering laughter. When I woke up, there were about a dozen monkey-like creatures swinging on the tree with glowing red eyes and fangs, laughing and mocking. I wasn't scared. In fact, I felt insulted. I shook my mom awake and told her to stop them laughing at me. When she woke up, they were gone. She didn't see anything, and I saw them vanish in front of my very eyes. But as soon as she closed her eyes again, they came back. I don't know how long I stared out that window, but I was never scared. The second encounter isn't mine, it's my mother's. My mother was on her way to her auntie's house, and this particular aunt, my mother had never seen her before, but rumor said she was a small-heighted woman. As my mom was walking, she saw a small woman, but too small to be considered normal. Her height was lower than my mom's knees, which is considerably small since my mom was only 15 at the time. Other than that, there was nothing strange about this woman, or scary in the least. The little woman hadn't noticed my mom until my mom yelled at her, "Auntie," and the little woman looked back at my mom. Hesitant, she started to quicken her pace. The little legs weren't doing much good as Mom also quickened her pace. But the little woman became fearful and started running, and then disappeared into thin air. When my mom eventually reached her auntie's house, she saw that yes, her aunt was small, but not nearly as small as the lady she had seen. Her grandmother explained that it was a jinn, but a harmless one. Those just want to be left alone and avoid human contact at all costs. Many people have stories like this to tell, some about harmless jinn and some not so innocent. Eventually, the terrorism in Afghanistan started leaking into the borders of Pakistan, and it was no longer a safe place to live, especially for a family. We were refugees. We got on a boat to find safety in a welcoming land, and the boat took us to Australia. They housed us at a detention center where they kept refugees, investigated them, and the ones deemed legitimate were able to become citizens and enter the country. Many people committed suicides there by hanging, slitting their wrists, and even burning themselves alive. The reason behind these suicides was the impatience for freedom, as some were detained for more than 3 years. There were a lot of people who were raped, and the place became a playground for ghosts of the lost souls. The children would come out to play at night because the weather would be cooler. The center was located in the middle of nowhere, and hence the heat. One night, as I walked by an empty shed, I saw the figure of a man around 40 years old. He was staring into space, and the door to the shed was locked, but it had a glass door so I could see him. As he stood there, he became bloody, like covered in blood pooling around him on the floor. There was so much blood it was oozing under the door towards me, and I was frozen still, but somehow not scared. When my cousin came to see what I was doing, the figure disappeared, but she told me that she did see the bloody man slowly disappearing too, so I wasn't going crazy. I guess I never feared the paranormal because I was so young I didn't yet understand it. At the detention center, everyone was given a wagon home to live in. I don't know really what to call it, so wagon will do. Women didn't live in these alone, as rapes were prevalent. One night, my mom and I went to stay the night in a wagon with other ladies. This is one of my mom's stories. She said that one night she got up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. She's a considerate woman, and even though she feared going outside alone, she didn't want to wake the other ladies. The walk towards the toilets was fine, but the walk back was a different story. Once inside the cubicle, she heard footsteps pacing back and forth. Not only could she hear it, but she could also see them under the door gap. Originally, she thought it was a male and feared potential rape. She stayed in the toilet till the pacing stopped, and when she thought the man had left, she got out of her cubicle and washed her hands to leave, but felt eyes watching her. As she walked back toward the wagon, she could hear footsteps behind her. When she turned around to see who it was, there was nothing. This happened at least 3 times before she realized it was the product of the paranormal. It couldn't have been a human, because on the path towards the toilets there were no buildings or wagons, it was just an open space. There was no way a person could run the distance back in the time frame of 1 or 2 seconds, and then return breathing normally. Eventually, after 3 months, we were released from the detention center. Earlier, I mentioned a younger sibling who had passed away. This is where he comes into play. Everything was fine for the next 5 or 7 years until my brother was born. And he had what you'd call a toy room. It was exactly that, nothing but toys in the entire room. This room wasn't part of the actual house. It had been built on by the previous owners. Whenever the room felt hostile, the temperature would drop to chilling. But when it was normal, the room felt welcoming. But none of us went there at night. At night, the room was absorbed by darkness. Even when turning on all the lights in the house, it would never reach into that room. One night, my mom was sleeping, and in the middle of the night, she felt something laying next to her. When she woke up, she saw a little baby. She could hear it, see it, feel it, even smell it. It was right there. It turned from her and walked into that toy room. And after that, no one ever went in there at night. Great Grandma by Anonymous. This was the early 2000s, and I was living in England at the time. I was in my early 20s and used to stay at my now ex-boyfriend Andy's house a couple of nights a week as I lived in a bed set, and it was pretty small. Andy's bedroom was always cold. It didn't matter what time of the year. It could be right in the middle of summer during a heat wave, and it would still be cold. One night, I woke up needing to go to the bathroom, and as soon as I got out of bed, I felt as if someone was staring at me from behind me. I turned around to see if Andy was awake, but he was fast asleep. So I opened his bedroom door and stepped out into the hallway, and the feeling of being watched intensified to the point that it was starting to scare me. Again, I turned to see if there was anyone behind me, but there was no one there, and that made me shiver. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, and I really needed to go, so I ran to it and locked the door behind me. Once in the bathroom, I didn't have the feeling of being watched anymore and started to relax, and laughing at myself for my overactive imagination. Once I had done my business, I opened the bathroom door and took a couple of steps out when I felt those eyes on me again. The temperature seemed to drop this time, and it felt as if there was a hand on my shoulder. And I jumped and turned, but I knew there couldn't be anyone behind me as I had just walked out of the bathroom. There was no one behind me. I ran back to the bedroom and jumped back into bed. I usually lay on my stomach or my side, but I laid on my back for the rest of the evening. The next morning, I told Andy what had happened, and he seemed skeptical, but mentioned that this place used to be his great-grandmother's house, who had died in the very room we were sleeping in. Not the scariest true story, but I can still feel that touch on my shoulder every time I think about it. The Hat Man by Anonymous. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night because you felt like someone was watching you? I'm not saying it's always ominous. I've woken up to the feeling my wife watching me sleep and rolled over to catch her awake plenty of times. My wife and I are newlyweds. I'm 26. I'm a Marine corporal and stationed at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar in San Diego, California. I work in avionics on heavy helicopters and live in a busy apartment just outside the base next to the freeway that shoots straight into downtown. Typically, my wife and I are very busy during the week and have just enough time to eat, work out, and get to bed. I'm usually out like a light by the time I'm down. In this particular week, the news was broadcasting reports after a gunman had attacked 2 military facilities in Chattanooga, leaving 4 Marines and 1 sailor dead. We all were a little edgy on base, but it wasn't enough to lose any sleep over. This night didn't end any differently. I went home, cleaned up, had dinner, hit the gym, washed up, turned off the lights, got in bed, and went to sleep. But around 2 a.m., something bothered me. Like that feeling when you feel someone is looking at you in public and you turn to see someone staring at you, and then they very quickly look away. That's how I felt suddenly waking up. I turned my body over and thought I'd see my wife awake on her phone or something, and looking over at me again like any other night. And that's when I saw him. What people called a Hat Man, only I didn't know it yet. The figure was looming next to my bed, and from what I could make out of the figure's appearance, was seemingly looking in my wife's direction. I initially called back to the news broadcasting of the gunman in Chattanooga, thinking I had been targeted and followed home for an attack. Instinctively, I tried to react, but my body's fight or flight mode seemingly froze me. And all at once, it dawned on me that the shadowy figure was impossibly shaded in the darkness. The kind of darkness you would have to stare out into the nothingness of a dismal outer space to see. The figure could be described as a scribbled outline of what was seemingly wearing a coat of some sort, and a bowler's cap, but completely lacked any detail. Like something off the cover of a 50s mystery novel with a shady character in an alleyway. Behind it, lurking near my closet, were 3 more shadowy figures. Their movements were stiff and incomplete, and not at all human-like. The Hat Man's presence over me was somehow demonic and overpowering, and I instinctively feared him as soon as I realized what I was seeing. My guess was that my wife had completely passed out, but she was facing his direction. I could only bark out the words, "What the fuck?" But the rest of my body was stuck in some sort of shock. I wanted to get out of bed and do something, but I just couldn't move. And the shadowy figure looming next to my bed over my wife seemed to change focus to my direction. I'm not really sure what happened after that. There seemed to be a lapse in time, or what was seemingly the character's reaction to my words. The next thing I remembered was that he just fucking vanished, like in some video game when someone logs out or something. I mean, he was just gone. Then I found that I could move, and my wife woke up right as that happened. She rolled over to look at me. I asked if she had seen anything, and she said she had woken up when she heard me yell. In the next few days, I did some research on what I had seen, and it turned out that the Hat Man is a global phenomenon. I haven't seen him again. I'm not sure what happened after I yelled at the figure. I mean, was there really a lapse in time, or did this thing just simply vanish? Since then, weird things started to happen around my house, such as the magnetic paperclip on my fridge having the magnet torn from the clip, and a clip tossed across the kitchen and the magnet hidden. Initially, I just assumed the thing had fallen apart from gravity, but when I found the parts and put them back together, the clip seemed sturdy. I smacked the clip off the fridge and the clip was intact. Then I tossed it across the kitchen and the magnet was still stuck to the clip. So I clicked some paperwork to it and left it on the fridge and walked over to the living room and sat down to watch some TV. That's when I heard a crack on the floor in the kitchen. No fucking way, I thought. I walked back into it. I found the clip and my paperwork right there on the floor. I picked everything up, and the magnet had been torn from the clip again. After some searching, I found it had been tossed on the top of my fridge, nearly out of reach, all the way in the back. From that point on, I just stopped using the clip. At night now, I sleep facing the wall and never roll over when I wake up in the middle of the night, unless I absolutely have to. I hope I never see the Hat Man and those shadowy figures creeping around my room behind it again. Haunted by Anonymous. Growing up, of course, I'd heard all the stories, watched all the movies, and was always interested in the paranormal as mostly nothing but entertainment, but also as just food for thought or daydream material. I'd seen a few weird things happen, but nothing that couldn't be explained away easily, or at least have enough shadow of a doubt cast upon them, rationally, to just leave them as a mild and forgettable question mark in my memories to later revisit, should I be so inclined. That all changed for me in the winter of 1997, when I rented a house in a small mountain community. The house itself was nothing terribly remarkable. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, ranch-style house sitting on an acre of woodland property. I lived alone, but often used one of the 2 guest rooms for friends who would come by to visit and get away from their usual surroundings in the town where we grew up, about 20 minutes away. The master bedroom where I slept and the guest bedroom that I would offer to my friends were both situated on the left side of the house. At the other end of the house was the 3rd bedroom, a 2nd bath, and a large walk-in storage closet that was at the very end of the hallway. None of those rooms or closet were ever used. When I first moved in, this was simply because they were on the opposite ends of the house from anything or any place that I needed. And being young, I didn't have enough burnable income to fill an entire house, so those places stayed empty. But as time went on, as I would move across or into the hallway, sometimes I would suddenly feel this intense sense of being watched coming from that other end of the hall. It was sudden and irregular, but it was so intense that it would actually freeze me in place. It was what I would imagine a rabbit must feel like when they're being sized up by a bear or a cougar in the woods. It didn't feel malevolent or anything like that, just cold and scrutinizing and threatening in a weird neutral way. It was incredibly unnerving, but it didn't happen terribly often, and I'm not a person who's prone to these sorts of feelings either. I never felt anything like it where I'd lived before and haven't since. At any rate, I didn't know what to make of it, and you can't base evidence off of feelings, so I just endured and filed it away as yet another question mark in my mind. Things went on as normal for a couple of months, and then things started disappearing. It was always something small, usually something of no great consequence. But the problem was that every time I would find whatever it was that went missing, it would always end up in either the third bedroom or that storage closet, without fail. Now, I'm a very particular person. Things have their place, and I've never been a person that just dropped things willy-nilly and then complained later that I couldn't find them. That's just never been me. So I know I wasn't doing this somehow accidentally to myself. This added to the fact that I never ever went down to that other end of the hallway. I also know it was no one else who could have been doing it because it would happen so often while no one else was present, or even while I was out of my house and everything was empty. The only other people with keys were the owners, and those occurrences would happen at all hours of the day, when I knew for a fact they were either at work or asleep. At one point, I even went so far as to install new knobs on the doors of those two rooms that had key locks on the outside, and I locked them with the keys that only I had. But it didn't change anything. The time that stands out most vividly for me was when I was home alone one night playing a game in the game room. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I came back, the controller for my PlayStation was sitting right where I had left it, but the extension cord that connected the controller to the console was gone. But it wasn't the actual cord of the controller. It was an extension that I had bought at Kmart or Walmart or some damn mart, the thing that made the cord longer because I sat about 15 feet away from the TV, and the console as it were. So I grabbed my keys off the hook, walked over to the storage closet and checked inside. Nothing. I locked it back up and opened up the third bedroom and stepped inside. And sure enough, there, under the window inside the room which had been locked up, was the extension cord for my controller, wound up perfectly neat. Over the course of the next 8 months that I lived there, I had socks, keys, mugs full of liquids, food from the refrigerator, light bulbs from various fixtures in the house, and even once the pillow from my bed randomly disappear, only to be found in that bedroom or the storage closet. I never saw anything move myself. I never saw any figures or apparitions or anything of that sort. But finally, the last straw came for me when I was again in the game room watching TV one night. It was the wee hours of the morning, which wasn't uncommon for me, as I was a night owl back then. But I was starting to get tired and considering heading to the bedroom when I suddenly felt and heard the very distinct sensation of someone blowing in my ear. This wasn't some draft. The house had none, and it wasn't caused by a vent or anything else I could ever find the source for. But again, it was incredibly distinct and very unnerving. So, being as my bank account was suffering and I was sick of playing hide-and-seek with various belongings to whatever was in the house, I decided to move out. I realize to some this may sound like no big deal. Certainly there are more extreme instances of hauntings out there than what I experienced. And what I experienced by comparison is pretty mild. I know a lot of people who I've told this about say that stuff like that, man, I want to lose someplace like that out of their own curiosity. But I can say as someone with a curious spirit of my own, that there's something so intensely unnerving about experiencing something like this in the sanctity of your own home. Not knowing when it'll happen next, what will go missing, and the constant dread that it might escalate without warning. And I assure you, even something as mild and as playful in a way that this might seem, it's nothing you want to live with. I've never scared easily. I'm very scientific and methodical in my approach to life and everything in it. I can say the one thing I definitely never want to experience again is living in a haunted house. Light in the Sky by Anonymous. Back when my mother was young, she used to deliver pizzas. It It was getting to be late at night, and it was just her and the manager left at the store for the rest of the evening. They got a call for a delivery not too far away from the store, so she left her manager alone and she drove to deliver the pizza. It was delivered in a timely fashion, and she was set to return shortly to the shop. She was trying to make good time just in case another order came in, as she was the only delivery driver that night, so she got impatient at a stoplight when it turned red. My mother looked up at the traffic signals, only to notice a strange light in the sky. She was captivated by it. It was strangely bright for an aircraft, and it didn't appear to be moving fast. It was just hovering there. My mom stared, trying to discern what the object was, and suddenly the traffic light turning green released her from her trance, and she continued to speed back towards the store. My mother soon made it back to the pizza shop, only to be greeted by her extremely frantic manager, who had just finished closing up the shop for the night. He was telling her how he had been worrying about her and that he wasn't able to leave the shop to check on her, but asked her what had happened. She was confused, and then reminded him that she had the short delivery to go on, and that she had even been speeding on the way there and back. He said he knew about that order, and the simple fact that she had left to run an order wasn't why he was worried. She told him again that she still didn't understand why a 30-minute order start to finish could have caused him to worry. She'd worked with him for many years. It wasn't like a 30-minute drive to get there and back was anything deserving of worry. That's when she said his face turned white. To this day, over 20 years later, she still remembers that all he said was, "You've been gone for over 2 hours." The Old House by Anonymous. Before I start my story, I should mention that this story takes place in Idaho, and throughout my life I've had various different scary experiences. But this is the one that my friends like me to retell every time we're around a campfire. I was about 12 years old when it happened. My former best friend Amy and I would always walk down to this abandoned house that was just down the street from where Amy lived. The odd thing was, although the house was abandoned and condemned, all of the belongings of the person who last lived there still remained in the house. One day, Amy and I decided to ask the neighbors who owned the house, and they said that all they knew was that the owner was some guy who now lived in California. We thought it was strange that the owner would move away and leave pretty much all of his belongings behind, and when I say all his belongings, I really mean all of his belongings. Since the house was condemned, all of the doors were locked. Amy and I couldn't go through the front door, but luckily there were some windows to look through. If you went around to the right side of the house, there was a small window we could easily look through. And when we did, we could see a lot of stuff that had been left behind. Things like clothes that were still on hangers in the closet, a fish tank, all the furniture, and pictures and frames were still hung on the walls. Stuff like that. Now, as I mentioned, Amy and I would go to this house a lot. Usually, it was every time I stayed the night at Amy's house. Unfortunately, we could never stay long because the neighbors of the house were really nosy, so they'd always be looking out their windows and coming out of their house to see why Amy and I were still at this house. The things never really got scary until one day the neighbors were all in their homes or somewhere else, and we had plenty of time to explore the property. When Amy and I walked down to the house, we took advantage of the situation and began looking through our usual window on the right side of the house. Then we began looking for other windows that weren't covered by blankets to keep the inside of the house hidden from outsiders. The house had 2 stories, so the window we always looked through was downstairs. All of the upstairs windows, and even some of the downstairs ones, had blankets covering them. Since we couldn't find any other windows to look through, we walked to the backyard, and that's when our hearts stopped. As we approached the house, we saw the basement door was open. To get to the basement, we had to walk down some stairs and then just open the door. But of all the times we had gone in the backyard, which was only once or twice due to our lack of time, The basement door had always been closed and locked. We looked down at the door, but we didn't walk down the stairs leading to it. The door was slightly ajar, so I'm sure if we walked down and had a flashlight, we probably could have seen inside, but we weren't stupid enough to do that. As we looked at each other and then back at the slightly open door, I felt a wave of panic and fear wash over me. How did the door get open? It couldn't have been some drunk person from the nearby bar, could it? Surely the neighbors would have noticed that. Unless whoever was down there realized that no one was watching, just how Amy and I had noticed. I was afraid to speak loud, afraid that the person who was in the basement would hear us. I honestly was surprised that they hadn't heard us this whole time. So I quietly whispered to Amy, "We should get out of here." But us being dumb, curious kids, we didn't leave, and instead just returned to the front of the house. As we stood in the front yard, we could also see the upstairs window at the left side of the house. As we stared at the window, the blanket that covered it began to move slightly, as if someone was trying to peek out. We then looked at the window that was directly in front of the house, just above the front door, and the blanket on that window also began to move slightly. I felt myself panicking. Did the basement lead up into the house? Was there more than one person in the house? Were they watching us? And so many questions began running through my head. Amy looked back at the other upstairs window that was to the left, and what I saw next made my heart stop, my eyes widen, my mind go blank, and my blood run cold. There was a girl. She looked about the same age as us, but she didn't look alive. She was wearing a long white dress and had long black hair and black eyes. My vision is pretty shitty now, but back then I could see her perfectly, so I knew I wasn't just seeing stuff. I glanced over at Amy to see if she was seeing what I was seeing, and by the fear-stricken look painted across her face, I could tell she was. The girl in the window just kept staring at us. I was too petrified to move, otherwise I would have run by that point. But after what seemed like an eternity of her staring at us, she began waving and tapping on the window. I've always been someone who, when I see a ghost or experience something paranormal, my obvious first reaction is, what the fuck was that? Or what the fuck just happened? But after calming down, I tried to approach whatever it was to try to figure out what the heck actually was happening. But I wasn't about to approach whatever was staring at Amy and me. Eventually, as I started regaining my ability to properly think, both Amy and I started slowly backing up and soon began running down the street away from the house. When we were about halfway back to Amy's house, we saw the mailman driving our way. But as we looked at his face, we almost screamed as we saw that he also had black eyes. We began screaming and running like our lives depended on it. What the hell was going on? He screamed at Amy and she yelled back. I don't know, was I really just seeing stuff now? Was that mailman even real? It was so real to me, but I couldn't be crazy because Amy saw it too. When we finally made it back to Amy's house, we went to her backyard, sat down, and after catching our breath, we began discussing what we had witnessed and eventually came to the conclusion that it must have been a ghost. I didn't sleep well that night, afraid the black-eyed girl was watching me through Amy's window. A couple of days later, we returned to the house, and the basement door was closed. Everything was back to normal, as if nothing had ever happened. Not too long after that, Amy said one night her mom saw the girl standing in the front yard, watching her. So there was no way Amy and I were just seeing things. I never told my mom this story because stuff like this scares her, but I did tell my sister and my friends. I don't know if anyone I've told actually believes me, or if they just like having me retell the story, because honestly, it is good. Frankly, I don't really care if anyone believes me or not, because I know what I saw, and I know what really happened. After this all occurred, I began wondering if the owner of the house left to California because he also saw the girl. I mean, it would explain why he left all of his stuff behind. Anyway, I'm 16 now, almost 17. Amy and I are no longer friends, and I haven't been back to that house in years. Not since our friendship ended. But I still occasionally find myself thinking about that experience and what might have happened if we had been curious enough to go down into the basement. I'm so glad we didn't. It still gives me chills to this day. And sometimes, while I'm standing outside or walking alone at night, I still expect to see that girl again, staring at me through a window. Or maybe she's trapped in the house we saw her at. I don't know. But I'm always prepared and hoping I won't ever see that girl again. The girl with the black eyes. Ouija board experience by Anonymous. Every kid has probably touched a Ouija board at some point. Even though they're supposed to be an instrument of the macabre, a damn thing is sold as a board game. Some form of paranormal monopoly or chutes and ladders, I guess. Of course, as a kid, I played with a Ouija board. Kids are inherently clever and stupid at the same time, and the very first time I played with a Ouija board, well, something strange happened. At least allegedly. As for what I mean by allegedly, I'll explain. I moved around quite a bit as a child, more so after my parents divorced when I was 8 years old. It was shortly after the divorce when I was 10 or 11 that I think my mom and I were living in a fairly large apartment building. It was the sort of complex that had 3 buildings set up in a U shape. Several of the neighbors on the floor we lived on had children, and we'd all play together. Play, for the most part, consisted of either carrying on in the community pool or trekking along the edge of the canalway that ran along the back of the complex, looking at fish, frogs, toads, and finding random items that had been thrown away, all the while being totally and completely dumb to the alligators out there. One of those summer days we stayed inside for some reason. It was probably raining. It always rains in the summer. We, 4 girls and 2 boys if I remember correctly, were goofing around in the hallway doing cartwheels and round-offs and other tumbling around, just basically being a nuisance. So of course we were scolded and retreated like little kitties to one of the apartments. One that belonged to a girl in the group. I don't really remember her name now, being as it was so long ago. I do remember, though, that she had blue eyes and blonde hair. I'll just refer to her as Wendy. We were sitting on the floor trying to think of something to do when Wendy got the idea that we should tell scary stories. For the most part, the girls in the group were tomboys, so pretty much everyone was game for it. We started telling each other various scary stories, the sorts that we'd heard at school or the stuff of local myth and legend, like the man with the hook instead of a hand. You get the idea. Naturally, the discussion came around to urban legends, notably the one about Bloody Mary. Being kids, being bored, and being stuck indoors, the brilliant idea of doing the Bloody Mary ritual came up, and we agreed to. There were 2 of the girls, the younger ones, who wanted no part of it, so they opted out. As it was her apartment, Wendy got a couple of candles and decided the bathroom was the best place to do it, since it was an interior bathroom with no windows and therefore no light. I don't remember offhand if the boys ventured into the bathroom, though. I'm assuming they did because I only clearly remember the younger girls begging off. We went into the bathroom, lit the candles, and after a few minutes of, "Are you sure? I don't know. Are you sure?" we finally shut off the light and performed what we knew of the ritual, saying Bloody Mary 3 times, staring into the mirror and waiting for her to appear. I'm not saying the ritual was exact, but I know there are variations on it. This was just the way we'd heard it way back when. After a few minutes of staring, a strange face illusion occurred. Those who saw it, well, they booked out of the bathroom. You can probably tell I'm not one who believes in the paranormal. I'm not saying I wasn't scared at the time. I mean, of course I was. But as an adult, I know that staring into a mirror in a dimly lit room can induce hallucinations. We fell to the carpeted floor in the living room, exhilarated, scared, and surprised that it worked. The younger girls who hadn't taken part were terrified as we'd gone in to call on Bloody Mary and wound up running out for our lives and yelling at the tops of our lungs. We were buzzing with adrenaline, which probably explains why we were so accommodating of Wendy's next idea, the Ouija board. She had one and thought it would be a great idea to bring it out and ask questions. So she got the board and the planchette, explained the basic premise on how to use it, and then had another stroke of brilliance, turned off the lights in the apartment. I remember it being fairly dim in there, even with the sliding glass doors facing the outside. It must have been raining or overcast for it to be so gray indoors, and we sat in a circle around the Ouija board and rested a fingertip each on the planchette. Then Wendy started the questions, asking if there was anyone present, who it was, what did they want, the usual. I remember sitting there, my eyes falling closed, and I also remember feeling like my body was rocking slightly. Has that ever happened to you? Sitting cross-legged, trying to stay still. It was like there was barely a perceptible sway, but the next thing I remember, I was being shaken. I heard my name being called, and everyone was looking at me with a mixture of worry and fear. I looked around the group, understandably confused. Nothing had happened as far as I knew, and the planchette hadn't moved. And now I'm paraphrasing what was said, but there are key points that I remember with clarity. I was wondering why it was that I had been shaken and yelled at, and one of the other girls in the group stared at me while she said something along the lines of, "Didn't you hear us calling your name?" Yeah, they were suddenly hollering at me. Of course I did. It was explained to me, though, that they had been calling my name for some time. Maybe 10 minutes or so with no response. I was then told that after the initial questions, the board had been asked if Bloody Mary was there with us. Apparently, that's when I pretty much folded in half, like I leaned forward at the waist and nearly hit my forehead on the floor. Then I was supposed to have slowly gotten up, and when I did, here's the alleged weirdness I mentioned earlier. When I came back to a seated position, apparently, I didn't look like me. I looked like an old woman. Now, keep in mind, I didn't witness this because I was, again, supposedly the one it happened to. But all of the other kids seemed pretty well convinced and worried. For a moment, I no longer looked like my 10-year-old self, but had the features of an old woman, a very wise and crone-like figure, and I was staring at everyone angrily. They said I had an evil look, as if I wanted to do them harm, and I have no idea if I was possessed or if it was a case of hallucination, or the play of light and shadow in the dim apartment just made it seem like I had had another person's face. What I do know is that I don't remember that happening, and I certainly don't remember staring anyone down or remember those 10 minutes where I wasn't responding to them. Those 10 minutes when I looked ancient and evil. And I'm not one who believes in the paranormal. I don't discount that it's possible, but I haven't seen proof of it, not personal proof. But what I do wonder is how you go about proving something when you are at the center of the occurrence and have absolutely no recollection of what happened. Summer Camp by Anonymous. This is a real story that happened to me about 7 years ago. I was at a 6th grade camp. A lovely time when they gather all of the 6th grade classes together to take an educational camping trip overnight and tell them a bunch of scary stories. All of the counselors' scary stories were just unbelievable things that not a single kid was afraid of. We were in 6th grade, and their stories were the equivalent of SpongeBob's hash-slinging slasher. But on our way back to our cabin for the night, there was an overwhelmingly creepy vibe in the woods. I may not have believed in the camp counselor's ghost stories of a man that had died working at the lake, but I was still afraid to go back to the cabin we were in because it was cabin 13. It wasn't because I was superstitious, but because my older sister had gone through the same camp trip just 3 years before, had been in cabin 13, and she told me that the boys had gone to their cabin in the middle of the night once and shoved mounted animal heads in the windows to scare them. I told one of my friends about it, and she agreed to stay up with me. We were hiding under our covers for the most part, scared but anticipating the arrival of the boys at the windows. We were looking at the windows for so long that when we finally took a moment to look at the ends of our bunks, we were shocked. At the end of each top bunk bed was a sort of end table, and on all of the tables other than mine and my friends, there stood a strange glowing figure. They looked almost like little army men about the size of Barbie dolls, and they were holding what looked like lanterns. Did I mention they were glowing green? There was something in the other hand of each glowing figure, too, but we couldn't tell what it was, as it was a smaller, thinner object, and neither my friend nor I had our contacts or glasses on. It was quite late at night, so I turned to my friend and said, "You see them too, don't you?" The look on her face told me my answer before she opened her mouth to tell me that she did. We were both petrified, unable to get up to take a closer look, and I almost felt as though something was not allowing me to get up besides my own fright. At first, the figures didn't even seem to be that significant. Creepy, yes, but not all that impossible to explain. Then we remembered that the table part that they were sitting on was at the foot of each of the top bunks, but the ladder for each was in the middle. It meant that if someone had put them up there, they would have had to climb up each person's ladder and maneuver their way around the sleeping occupant. That is, if the person in their bunkmate were even sleeping. I took a mental note of who was sleeping where and the location of the figures to ask the next day if anyone had seen anything during the night. Then the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning. But what happened the next morning creeps me out to this day. I again confirmed with my friend that what we saw was in fact real, and she agreed. I then asked the people that had the figures at the end of their beds if they had seen anything that night without telling them about the figures until they had answered. All 4 pairs in the bunks that had figures admitted that they hadn't seen anything, but they had all fallen asleep early because they were tired for some unusual reason. To this day, I don't know how those figures got there, how they disappeared, or what they were. But frankly, I don't really want to know. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you're catching this on YouTube and you like what you've heard and seen, please give the video a thumbs up. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought of the stories and what else you'd like to hear. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not become a subscriber? Maybe even tell a friend about the channel. I would appreciate it. If you'd like to support the channel a bit further, find a link to my Patreon page, and of course consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is in the description too. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.